19th, Board of Harbor Commissioners. Jeanette, would you like to call roll, please?
Yes, Jim Sloan.
Here.
Bill Spicer.
Here.
Betsy Kramer.
Here.
Merritt McCrae.
Here.
Lang Sly.
Here.
John Stedman.
Here.
Shoham Yaniv.
Here. All right. Any changes to the agenda, Scott?
Mr. Chair, no changes this evening.
Okay. And this is a time that we open up to public comment. I see that we do have one person here to speak, Courtney Thomas. Would you like to come up, please?
All right. Good evening. Thank you, Commissioner Sloan and commissioners. I'm really glad to be here with you tonight just to take a little bit of your time to tell you about the Ocean Friendly Restaurant Program, which is launching in Santa Barbara this summer. So this is a program run by Surfrider. If you're not familiar with Surfrider, they're a global nonprofit organization that works to protect the beach and the coast, and they have local chapters. One is based here in Santa Barbara. So I'm working for the university in Isla Vista and helping Surfrider launch the program here. So the program's primary goal is to reduce plastics and single-use items from restaurant, particularly for takeaway, because that's what Surfrider often finds during their beach cleanups on the beach. Things like straws, styrofoam containers, lids, and such. So this program aims to give positive recognition to restaurants who are using sustainable practices that are kind of above and beyond to help reduce those items from ending up on our beaches. So there are 4 mandatory criteria currently. This is changing in August when straws upon request will also be mandatory. I realize that, there have been a lot of changes at the city of Santa Barbara level as well with new ordinances they've come out with. So, that'll be changing for a lot of restaurants no matter what. But if restaurants, want to act now and participate, they can be recognized for their practices. Some of the other criteria include water conservation, promoting sustainable seafood, energy conservation actions at restaurants. So I'm working with a colleague to launch the program this summer, and I originally got connected with the commission because we're planning a launch event in August. I'll send you the final date when that is announced to celebrate the launch of this program out on Stearns Wharf, and we're working with the Sea Center for this event as well. So we're really excited. We've already had 3 restaurants sign up and several who are working on the registration process right now. So in exchange for restaurant participation, Surfrider will promote restaurants on their social media as well as the national and local websites. We have some funding to do paid advertising in local media outlets as well, and just encourage people to patronize restaurants who are participating in the program and choosing to be ocean friendly. I'm happy to take any questions now, but I also have included a sheet of paper that I think got circulated that has my contact information on it. So if you'd like to call me or email me if you have additional questions, or if you know of a restaurant that you think should participate or might be interested, I'd be more than happy to set up a meeting with them and continue the conversation as well.
Great, thank you. Any questions?
Yes, does it cost a restaurant anything to sign up?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there is a membership fee that's involved. The fee is based on, it's a donation to Surfrider that's tax deductible. 50% of that donation goes to the local chapter, and then 50% goes back to the headquarters office to run the Ocean Friendly Restaurant Program, things like staff time, printing of these brochures, stuff like that. It's based on the number of employees a restaurant has, so it varies between $125 and $175 a year. And that's an annual fee. So because of this partnership with UCSB and some donors that they're connected with, we do have funding to waive the membership fee for restaurants if they're interested in taking advantage of that for the first year to kind of get on board, see if they're getting like any gains from the program and what they think of it, and then they can choose to continue and make that donation after the first year. About half the restaurants we've signed up so far have chosen to take the membership fee, but then about half of them have actually said that they wanted to make the donation to Surfrider and have chosen to go ahead and pay for this first year too.
Good, good.
What are the restaurants that have signed up?
Yeah, so far, Locavore Kitchen, which is a new restaurant over by the public market, is signed up. Shoreline Beach Cafe is also participating, and then the Shop Cafe on Milpas Street. Yeah, and we have several restaurants, including Endless Summer and The Lark, and a few others who are in the process of registering right now, too.
Okay.
Thanks, Kate.
Any other questions?
Make sure your mics are on.
Yeah, just, great. And where can people find out more information about this if you want to rattle off the website?
Yeah, well, it's and I can send, maybe Jeanette can circulate this link too, but if you go on the Surfrider National website,
Okay.
There's more information about the broader ocean-friendly restaurant program there. And then if you go to santabarbara.surfrider.org, that's the local chapter website, and I'm helping kind of revamp their website right now with some more information. But so far we have a map that includes participating restaurants and their logo, so that we can link to their website, and a little bit more local information is our goal. So that's in progress.
Great, great. Well, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Okay. Next up, approval of minutes.
So moved.
Do we have a second? All in favor? Aye. Abstain? Okay. Moving on to Harbor Commission matters. Item number, first on the list here is the election of chairperson and vice chairperson and commission committee assignments.
I'm going to read it.
Yeah, if you don't mind, please.
Item number 2, election of chairperson and vice chairperson and commission committee assignments. Recommendation that Harbor Commission A, nominate and elect the Harbor Commission chairperson and vice chairperson for fiscal year 2018 through 2019 per the City Charter Section 804 and the Board of Harbor Commission rules adopted September 16, 2010. And B, review and update as necessary membership on various Harbor Commission committees.
Okay, why don't we start with item A here? Are there any nominations for chair or vice chair?
I think our current president is an excellent one. I would like to nominate him for another year.
Well, thank you, Merritt. I think I'd like to nominate Bill Spicer.
I would accept that, and I also would nominate Jim Sloan as vice chair.
Do we have a second?
I would second that.
Okay. Any discussion? Any comments, anybody? All right. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained?
Abstain.
Okay.
Okay. Why don't, I'll finish this item and then we can switch,
Okay.
switch chairs here. Review and update as necessary membership of the various committees. So I assume everybody has the list of committees. And I think the easiest way to do this is if anybody would like to be on a committee that they're not on or would like to drop off a committee they are on. It's on, it's in this package.
I'll get you a list.
There you go. I think, is that it?
I did see it.
Yeah, it's there. It's on the... No. Maybe you two can share that? Here, Betsy, you can share mine. You'll find it as soon as you stop looking. So here are the...
Okay.
Comments, anybody? John?
Yes. So, just to be clear on the options here, we either remain status quo or we volunteer for a committee assignment and then it gets voted on? Is that how it works?
Yeah, pretty much. I think that's the way we've operated in the past. If someone shows a desire to be on one of the committees, then, I think we can, either make room for them or we vote on, that.
Gotcha. Okay.
But there can't be more than 3 on a committee.
Yeah, we can't have a quorum on a committee,
Right.
a
Right.
quorum of the harbor commissioners on committee, so it's 3, so. So is there one that you'd like to be on that you're not on?
Not based on this list, no, I think there isn't room.
Well, no, is there one that you, there are several of us that would probably be willing to make room on
Yeah,
committees.
yeah. For instance, I'm on 3, and I'd be happy to relinquish the spot if you see one that interests you.
And I'm on 4 of them, and I would gladly relinquish one.
So I think you're getting an idea of how this goes, John.
Okay. All right.
So if there's one you want to be on, speak up.
The local coastal program update committee is of interest.
That's pretty much finished.
Yeah.
It's done?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
perfect. Short-lived tenure.
Okay. Shoham, anything?
I would like to be on the parking committee if that's possible.
Okay, let's just go around and we'll just write the names down. Bill?
I'm happy to relinquish my spot on the parking. I could relinquish my spot on parking.
Okay. Betsy?
I'd like to stay on the budget committee, and I'm also interested in parking.
Okay. Merritt?
I think I've got quite enough.
Okay. Lang?
It gets exhausting, they meet so often.
I'm okay where I am, but if there, is a hole somewhere, I'm happy to plug that too. It looks like we've got everything covered.
Okay. Well, so far what I've heard is that Shoham would like to be on parking, and Bill, you would be willing to step off of that?
Absolutely.
Okay. So make a motion to make that change?
So moved.
Yeah, but LCP's over. Do you, well, Carl, can you comment on that?
Chair Sloan and Commissioners, the draft LCP has been submitted to and approved by the Planning Commission. The next step is to go to council, I believe, August?
Yeah, August 7th.
August 7th. And at that time, the draft LCP will be over. There may be things in the future. There's still the implementation plan. I suggest you leave a subcommittee intact.
Okay.
Although they're in the foreseeable future, it wouldn't be meeting for a little while. There's 2 parts to it, and the implementation plan is a big part, and it will come to fruition and happen. So it's, may not be as, take up as much time in the near future, but it will eventually. So
Okay.
I suggest leaving that subcommittee intact.
Good comment. Okay.
And change whatever members you
Right.
so desire.
So, John, I would be willing to step off of that if you would like to.
Yeah, absolutely, John.
Okay. Okay. So we have 2 changes. The LCP update committee, I will drop off and John will get on it. And on parking, Bill will drop off of it, Shoham will go on it. Do I have a second for that motion?
I would second that.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Okay.
Abstain.
Did we do that right?
You wouldn't need to abstain.
I don't need
unless
to
you have-
abstain?
Unless you have some other reason to abstain. But being,
You don't need to abstain from this vote. There's no conflict. I mean,
Okay,
so, but you can if you want. It's
I approve myself then. To be on the subcommittee.
okay. I think it's time for you and I to swap seats.
The peaceful transition of power.
Here.
Goodbye.
Excellent, excellent. Congratulations. Ken?
That might cut, so.
Okay.
Careful what you say. All right.
Greetings.
Greetings. Nice to see you again. Bear with me as I get my sea legs here. Okay. Item number 3. Jeanette, will you
Yes.
please read to us?
yes, Chair Spicer. Item 3, Sea Level Rise Adaptation Plan Subcommittee appointment. Recommendation that Harbor Commission appoint one Harbor Commissioner to serve on a new Sea Level Rise Adaptation Plan Subcommittee.
Good evening, Chair Spicer and Commissioners. In the spirit of subcommittee assignments, we have another one this evening at the request of the City Council. By way of background, the local coastal plan update, as I mentioned, the draft coastal land use plan, which is one part of that, is for the most part finished. It includes interim sea level rise development review policies, requires preparation of a sea level rise adaptation plan. The city obtained a grant from the Coastal Commission. CCC is the California Coastal Commission, and they've been working on it. They worked on the land use plan update, and they also received another grant for the sea level rise adaptation plan, which is a component of that. The city hired a firm out of Northern California known as Environmental Science Associates, ESA. They've done lots of work for the city in the past, and they're very experienced with this. So this effort, my mic is pretty on. So this effort is underway. ESA is under contract with the city, and they've just gotten started. So the scope of work for the sea level rise adaptation plan includes updating the city's vulnerability assessment, which was done several years ago. It looks at several different planning horizons, 2030, 2060, and 2100, based on state guidance. And what that means is the state pretty much says to coastal communities, these are the levels of sea level rise elevations you need to deal with for planning into the future. I don't have the exact amounts, but to put it in context, a high level at 2100 is about at least 5 feet above what it is now. So that would be a pretty devastating circumstance to deal with into the future. So the sea level rise adaptation plan is a very serious effort for the city to look at. There's hazard modeling, looking at increased frequency, extent of flooding, wave impacts, bluff erosion, beach erosion. This looks like an image of Goleta Beach. We've seen a lot of that on the news lately, and the kind of things that can happen with sea level rise and coastal erosion. They're going to look at impacts to private and public assets, and as well as economic and fiscal impacts from the effort. The adaptation planning includes costs and benefits of adaptation strategies, the feasibility, effectiveness, economic and fiscal impacts, environmental impacts, and legal issues, and triggers for implementation. And this is pretty much what the Coastal Commission has asked coastal communities to look at. What do you expect to happen? Where are you vulnerable? What do you propose to do, and what are triggers for doing certain things? And also identifying local work. This would come as a local coastal program amendment. So the LCP right now was adopted in 1981, and there's a half a dozen or more amendments. The Harbor Master Plan was one of them in 1996. It's been superseded by the LCP land use plan when it's adopted by the Coastal Commission. So it's the waterfront's long-range planning document. The input process for this effort is the plan subcommittee, which we'll talk a little bit more about tonight. There's a staff interdepartmental team, staff members from Parks, Waterfront, Public Works, our city's Community Development Planning Division, consultations with the Coastal Commission, the county, and some other agencies like the USGS, for example. They're very involved. And public outreach is an important component of this. The subcommittee purpose and task is to provide input on public outreach, just how do we get the message out, social, economic, and political aspects of the plan, guiding principles and adaptation strategies. And there's a wide range of strategies from what people frequently refer to as managed retreat, doing nothing, getting out of the way, and the others defend and fight, put up walls and defend our critical infrastructure. The subcommittee will review major deliverables from ESA, report back to City Council and the full commissions, and we expect there to be about 6 to 7 meetings through the summer, and they are probably, I think they begin early next month. So council is recommending that there be 8 members, 3 council members, 2 planning commissioners, 1 harbor commissioner, 1 parks and rec commissioner, and 1 water commissioner. And they suggested using the LCP update subcommittee members. Commissioners Sloan and Kramer and Yaniv have been on the LCP subcommittee. Commissioners Kramer and Sloan have been quite involved and been to all of the meetings so far. And the idea is that they've got the knowledge, they kind of know which way this whole thing is going and how the adaptation plan is put into the context of the overall local coastal program update. So the recommendation tonight is that the Harbor Commission appoint a member to serve on the new Sea Level Rise Adaptation Plan Subcommittee. Keep in mind, this is a citywide council and planning commission and advisory board committee. This is separate from the subcommittees that are made up just of harbor commissioners themselves. This is a citywide thing. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those at any time.
Thank you, Carl.
Yeah.
Commissioner Kramer.
I do have a question, Carl. I believe that initially there was thought to be only 2 council members and that they decided to have 3 for whatever reason. And since there's only recommending 1 harbor commission, would there be a possibility of having 2 if 2 of us wish to do it?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Kramer, we could certainly advance that if that's the will of the commission. I don't really see a problem with it considering the potential impacts to sea level rise to the waterfront. This is our department's the one that stands
Exactly.
to have the most impacts. And like I said, if that's the will of the commission, I'd certainly advance that idea. I think there's a lot that a couple members could contribute if that's what you'd like.
I know that both Jim Sloan and I have gone to many of the meetings, and you came on late to it, Joel, I think, but I don't know what your thing is.
Okay. One moment before we get to that, are there any other questions for Carl on this? I had one. Is this the same group that wanted to paint the blue line showing the sea level rise?
Chair Spicer, no. This
Okay.
is a separate effort.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so we have to choose our representatives for this group. Commissioner Kramer has made it clear she's interested.
I'd be interested as well.
Okay. Any?
I abstain from.
Okay. Any other commissioners looking at this right now? Okay. So we do have 2 commissioners, and I do like the fact that since our department is the front line of sea level rise, that we advance 2 commissioners or 2 spots for this commission, for this subcommittee. So, I'd entertain a motion for that.
So moved.
I make a
Well,
motion.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah, I make a motion.
And I think we have 2 things here is to increase it to 2 and then to name
And then choose the 2?
if you want to run through that.
I would like to move that we propose that the number of harbor commissioners be increased to 2 from 1.
I'll second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Okay. The second part is choosing those 2. Can we get a motion?
I would like to move that, I'd like to nominate Betsy Kramer to be one of the 2.
I would second that. Do we have, shall we vote on Commissioner Kramer? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Abstains? Nays? Okay. I would also like to advance that we put Commissioner Sloan as our second spot. If there's a second. Commissioner Kramer has seconded that. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any
Abstain.
abstentions noted? Any nays? None. Okay, thank you. Item number 4, the director's report.
Well, welcome back, Chair Spicer, to the
Thank you.
chairman's seat, and commission members. Since we last met, the council adopted the ordinance amending the municipal code to establish a vessel speed limit of 5 miles an hour inside the Stearns Wharf Y, which we're all well familiar with as it was introduced recently, and it's sort of a fallout from the accident that happened just about this time last summer. I had the opportunity to meet with our newest council member, Oscar Gutierrez, who's in charge of who represents District 3, the west side. When Kathy Murillo was elected mayor, it left a vacancy there, which has been vacant until replaced by Councilmember Gutierrez. Actually, before I got a chance to meet with Councilmember Gutierrez, Carl and Mick got a chance to meet with him as well. So we all had our little orientation with him, and very nice gentleman. He was officially seated on July 10th, and my discussion with him centered on the waterfront organization chart and how the department is organized, a brief look at revenues and expenses, and our 6-year way of planning our capital and budget outlook. So, rather than just a 2-year outlook, we always do, as you know, a 6-year projection. And then on to the fun part. We did a Harbor Patrol boat tour out around East Beach and back, and looking at sites like the desal intake, the dredge, and the wharf, and other areas. Oscar Gutierrez is familiar with the harbor and mentioned he's been going down to Marina One to a friend's boat for the last 10 years or so to see the 4th of July fireworks, and was very impressed. He said it's the best show he's seen, and Mick will fill you in on that in a little bit. And another funny note was that I lived on the west side for a few years, a long time ago, and it turned out we were just about a block away from each other. And I had a business down there as well, quite close to Mitchell Terrena and San Andreas there. And he remembered the business. He must have been a boy back then. But he remembered the business, so we had this little connection, so that was kind of fun too. Tentative agenda items for the August meeting. We're finally making some headway on the fuel dock. Lease agreement, as you might imagine, the insurance has been very complicated on a business like this. It involves excavating and replacing the 4 10,000-gallon fuel tanks that are buried underneath Harbor Way right about in front of the fish market and paddle sports. And that's all tied in with it, the construction, the excavation. They're responsible for it, so it's been a very complicated. They've been very agreeable. McCormick's has been very agreeable with it, but it's just difficult to figure out how to set it all up so that the insurance is correct and so forth. And along with that goes the ice house agreement. It's something that we maintain, but the fuel dock, since they're right there, they operate it and ice up the fishing boats. And also we hope to have the Santa Barbara shellfish agreement lease in front of you again, next month. So. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Any questions? Thank you very much. Item 5, business services. Mr. Bossy?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Real quickly, this report probably would have been better last month, but as you know, we didn't have a meeting in June, so it's a little bit out of sync with the normal process nonetheless. Friday, May 18th marked the final cruise ship visit for fiscal year 2018, and a total of 17 cruise ships made Santa Barbara one of their destinations. And these cruise ships frequent our area in the non-peak business times of the year, generally September through November, even into early December, and then again February through May. And they continue to receive a lot of support and backing, I should say, from our Stearns Wharf Merchant Association, the Chamber, the Santa Barbara Chamber of Commerce, as well as Visit Santa Barbara and downtown Santa Barbara. And we work with all those folks as part of our hospitality tent. So when people get off the ship, they know where they're going and they can find their places a whole lot easier. The total number of passengers for this past season, we estimated about 40,000 additional visitors came to Santa Barbara based on the cruise ship sizes. And we are already underway for fiscal year 2019, and we currently have 16 cruise ships scheduled to visit Santa Barbara with the total amount of visitors right around the 33,000 visitor mark. Our first cruise ship is scheduled for Saturday, September the 8th, so just after Labor Day weekend. So Scott and Dominique, again, have been working on this, and they do so every year, and we're slowly getting ready for the cruise ships for the fall season, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions? Commissioner Kramer?
Yeah, I've got a question. I saw in the LA Times on Sunday that the Princess Cruises is going to be coming down 9 trips from San Francisco, which will stop in Santa Barbara, it said. Have you heard from them about it? It said they got 3,560 passengers per ship, which sounds like quite a major visit.
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Kramer, yes, we have. I saw the same article you did, so that was interesting to see. So yes, they are our larger cruise ship business that comes to us, and they do. We like the big ships. Those are the 3,500 passengers. Our merchants love them. The State Street loves them, and everybody else likes those. We also have smaller ships with maybe 300 people on board, which doesn't require as much coordination in a hospitality tent and shuttles and things like that. But yes, they are scheduled to make some stops. That was good to see. So hopefully they fill up real quickly.
It seemed a stunning number of people, almost the same population as Solvang and probably more than Buellton. So thank you.
Any others? I had a quick question. Now that Lower State Street is open, I'm imagining that's quite a boom to have these cruise ships. Do we, or does the Chamber of Commerce track where the money is spent or where the visitors go to?
Commissioner Spicer, yes, Visit Santa Barbara every few years does a study and tracks where the people are going, generally trying to find out how much money is spent and where it's going as far as downtown or the waterfront. It's really hard to determine if people are squeezing out to the wharfs or coming up State Street, and it kind of depends on the type of ship it is. Mm-hmm. Some of the ships are more glamorous and more expensive, so it's a different type of clientele. Others are maybe a 3-day cruise, and so the clientele of the ships varies, and it kind of determines a lot of time where they make their way once they get on land, as well as the tours that are offered to them.
Right. Well, I will offer my compliments. This particular topic used to be the one that I would get asked questions about by friends and colleagues around town, but it seems like we have you and your group, all of you have got the cruise ship system dialed in so that the impact is all positive. So well done. Thank you.
Thank you. That's primarily Dominique Samario and then our parking staff, Cesar Barrios and James Hatzidakis.
Congrats to them.
Brian, I have a question as well. Does the city have any expenses related to any of the cruise ships that come in, or is it all covered by the cruise ships?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Yaniv, the city does have expenses. We have expenses. That includes our permits for closing off one lane of Creel Boulevard. We also pay for the additional shuttles that MTD gives us on those particular. They don't give it to us. We pay for it, but they show up. For those particular days, that averages about $50,000 for those shuttles alone. There's also a police fee, which does get paid by the different cruise ships. They also have to pay for the security and the fencing that you see out there to make it compliant with Homeland Security. So there are costs that are borne by the waterfront department and other city departments as well.
Do the cruise ships, do they reimburse for, or those are costs that the city pays for? or
Those are
covers?
costs that we pay for, but again, with each cruise ship, we get $7 per passenger, whether they come off the ship or not.
Gotcha.
So this is a plus
Sure.
for us. On the smaller ships, it gets a little tight
Sure.
because the shuttles cost what a shuttle costs. But this is a good revenue generating program for us.
Sure.
It kind of takes the place of a couple things that we've had in the past with our fuel dock workers now moving down to Carpinteria, so we don't have that flow of parking permits, as well as the Maritime Museum a number of years ago paid off an enormous part of their loan, and so their monthly rent is significantly less than it used to be. So it makes up for that gap,
Yeah.
so we're right about even.
Sure. Thank you.
Commissioner Kramer.
I had heard that from one of the artists along Cabrillo Boulevard that cruise passengers didn't stop there, and I've been assured that, in fact, that the waterfront does speak to the passengers, or at least sends out something or other to the ship passengers that to please visit the artists along Cabrillo Boulevard. Is that being done, in fact? I keep hearing from one of them, oh, no, the cruise ship people don't come to us. But
Chair Spicer, hold on. Chair Spicer, Commissioner Kramer, that would be primarily for a Sunday visit. I would imagine
Right,
you're talking
yes,
about
of
the
course.
Arts and Crafts Show. So when people come, as the way these cruise ships work, a lot of these people sign up for events, tours, and things like that well in advance of getting here. They may be able to do it while they're on the ship coming to a particular location, but a lot of time their itineraries planned, whether it's a local tour, a local wine tour, whatever it is. But in cases like that, there are still a lot of people who just get off the boat and just kind of want to do their own thing. And so on a Sunday, the hospitality tent, that's what they're there for, to direct people. If they are going on a tour, they can position them accordingly along Cabrillo Boulevard. People will come up, hey, what can I do? I'm not on a tour, and they'll direct them to interesting things, whether it be over in the harbor, Stearns Wharf, the Arts and Crafts Fair on Sundays. So we do try and help people navigate throughout the waterfront and downtown.
So if I hear the complaint again, I should suggest that they talk with the hospitality people and
You could do that, yeah. I mean
it's,
you can be rest assured that everybody is telling them a whole number of things to do. And I'm sure everybody wants more of the cruise ship passengers to visit their restaurant or art shop or whatever.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Hi, Chair Spicer, Commissioner Kramer. I'd like to just follow up because since I'm on site every visit, I would like to say that actually we hear very positive feedback from the art show, so much so that when we have Saturday visits, they have added an additional art show on the Saturdays. We also have different signage for Sunday visits and Saturday visit when the art show is taking place that specifically point them, and it says, 10-minute walk, local art show. And it's quite popular with our visitors because when they come back, because we get repeat cruisers, they'll come back in the middle of the week, and one of their biggest complaints is, where are all those local artists? Because I'd like to purchase more goods there. So it is actually quite popular with the cruise ship passengers. I'm sure, however, as my colleague, Mr. Bossi, said, it always varies on the passengers and on that day and who visits which vendor. But it is a really big success, and we're happy to support them when they are here on a weekend that it's taking place.
Great. I will convey that to the people.
I really appreciate that.
I appreciate the information.
Thank you so much
very
for doing that.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions on this? All right. Thank you, Mr. Bossi. Ms. Samario. Item number 6, Facilities Management. Mr. Triberg.
I have 2 items to report on this evening, both out on Stearns Wharf. Stearns Wharf is an interesting structure out on the ocean, supported by thousands of piles in a rather complex structure. I presented this to you last year, and I'll do another recap just to give people an idea of how a typical wharf is built. Wharfs are set on piles that are driven into the ground, the seafloor, embedded about 10 to 20 feet. There are caps set on, 12 by 12 inch pressure treated Douglas fir, stringers on end, and then deck boards. And this is a fairly typical for a wooden wharf anywhere that you'll see up and down the coast. Stearns Wharf is one of the largest wooden wharfs on the coast. There are 158 bents. These are rows of piles. There's 2,309 piles. The length of cap, 7,900 feet. Length of stringers, 40,000 feet, and 4 acres of deck. And as you can imagine, we'll talk a little bit about how much we replace every year. The cost of replacing this whole thing would be astronomical. We inspect about 500 piles every year. As a matter of fact, it's one of our objectives in our budget this year. The inspection is done based on an evaluation and structural guidelines prepared by a firm called Moffitt & Nickel that we're updating again this year to kind of address fire trucks coming out, the different apparatus they use. So it's kind of a living and breathing document, but we do follow the lead of an engineering firm, a marine engineering firm that has a lot of extra expertise in these kind of structures. We have 4 pile types. Normally what I talk about when I talk about this contract is wooden piles. There's about 850 wooden piles, about 200 are under buildings, so they're treated somewhat separately. So the annual pile driving contract are those wooden piles that you can access from the deck. They're all treated with their polyurea coating. We used to wrap them, but now we get them pre-coated, and they makes them last a lot longer. We have splice piles and fiberglass jackets, and these are all piles that are under buildings. So the piles that are under, for example, the Harbor Restaurant, when they deteriorate and need to get replaced, you can't drive a pile anymore. So you have to use one of these 2 techniques. The preferred method is the fiberglass jacket that's filled with the grout, a cementatious product, and that kind of restores the cross-section and the load-bearing capacity of the pile. Splice pile is kind of a last resort because they're usually set in 3 pieces and they just don't really have the lateral strength that the other ones do. But all in all, it still supports the wharf, and we actually proactively add fiberglass jackets to all the piles under buildings now, and in about 5 years they'll all be treated that way. We have steel piles under Moby Dick's restaurant and under the Sea Center, and those were all rebuilt after fires in 1998 and 2001, respectively. This year's work, just to put it in context, we replaced 21 piles, installed 2 splice piles, 26 feet of cap, and 20 feet of stringers, and 3,800 square feet of deck boards. And compared to the inventory that we have, it's amazing. This is a small fraction of what we have out there, but it's also a testament to how well we've maintained it over the decades. My predecessors were very, very vigilant about inspecting as much as they could every year, and as soon as something meets the criteria for replacement, we replace it. So maintaining the structural integrity of the wharf is vital, considering its location. The cost this year was about $381,000, labor and materials. Schott Contracting Corporation submitted a low bid of $213,000, and that's just for labor. There's a little bit of extra work that we're going to do next week, as a matter of fact. We lost a pile during Hurricane Fabio's swell, which is quite unusual for a hurricane swell to reach all the way up into Santa Barbara, but a couple of weeks ago was pretty big, and banged a few piles around, and one that we hadn't caught in inspection came loose. It's under the valet lot, so that'll happen next week. It's kind of nice that we can get on it so quickly. This is included in our capital improvement plan every year. It's gone up to $425,000 a year. We buy all the materials. We keep an inventory of caps, piles, stringers, deck boards, everything to replace about 3 to 5 bents. The scenario would be as if a section of the roadway washed out in a catastrophic storm, we wouldn't have to procure the material. We could just go out, get a contractor, have it done, and get the wharf opened up as quickly as possible. And as most of you know, it's the waterfront's most vulnerable and valuable facility, so we spend a lot of money on it, and hopefully keep it strong for the winter storms that are coming. My next project is the Stearns Wharf Guardrail Project. This is a before and after sequence here for you, so if you haven't been out there lately, it looks different. Just by way of background, this is a project that was conceived about 2015. We had a few incidents and wanted to upgrade the existing guardrails to make them code compliant. Codes change every few years, and we try to keep our guardrails compliant. We do a lot of guardrails along the seawall in the harbor. I bring those to you every year. We just finished one. We do the same thing on the wharf. As part of that review, it was determined by our Building and Safety Division that we would have to put a guardrail up where there currently is none, or where there was none, I should say. The consideration was for loading, offloading cargo, and we really don't do that anymore at the wharf. It's primarily a visitor serving use. I presented this to the commission back in June of 2016, which led to a long and lengthy review by the Architectural Board of Review, and then ultimately we received a building permit. But as part of the research for this, we mocked up 4 different alternatives. One was a hog wire alternative that was recommended by a ABR member, and all these different scenarios just to look at what would be best. And what they finally came up with was a cable rail design, which I'll show you a picture of in the end, to preserve views, and it really looks quite nice now that it's done. The scope of work, as you can see in blue, is the existing guardrail. So the majority of the wharf has had a guardrail, which will be incrementally upgraded. The green section is a short section by the passenger loading ramp, which is a new wooden guardrail. And the red section around the end is this new cable rail design. Cushman Contracting was the low bidder for this project. They have this device is a hanging scaffold that they hung over the side and worked from. It's really awkward to work on the side of a wharf or underneath a wharf, so they're very creative, and they did quite a good job. They came upon some very unique situations. Most of the times you're looking straight into what we call stringers. They're sitting on top of caps. This is a cap, this is a stringer, and then these are deck boards. Most of the stringers run parallel to the run of the wharf, and you would just attach a post to it. Well, just because of how the wharf dog legs, these ran at a diagonal, so we had to go underneath the wharf, cut them all back, and install a stringer, which is actually a fascia board, to attach the post to. So this was a little bit of extra work. You can see with these projects, you try to think of all the design considerations, and you get into the wharf and go, oh, we didn't think of that, did we? So Cushman, they're quick on their feet, and they were really good to work with on this to figure out some of these difficulties. One of the considerations that came up when we went through the design review and before the commission was that to preserve an area to load and offload cargo or other stuff, this is an area by the maintenance shop where the Santa Barbara City College Marine Tech program does all their training dives. So we actually built a gate right here. The gate's not here, but there's a gate. It can be opened, and they can conduct their operations. If we needed to load and offload stuff through there, that's sort of the consideration or the concession in that section right there. This is the finished cable rail product. You can see through it quite nicely. It's well received. There were, it was on KEYT the first couple days they started construction, and there was comments on either side of pro, for, and against it. But now that it's done, we haven't heard a word. It's sort of the new normal, and people are fishing and enjoying it. And we've kind of achieved our public safety goals that we wanted to all along. Cushman submitted a low bid of $181,000. We included this in our capital improvement program a couple of years ago for $101,000. The bid was quite a bit higher. We sought and were approved for additional funding by City Council. The type and quantity of materials increased the budget considerably. When we went and put together a preliminary design, and after we got out of the final design after the building permit review, it changed the design quite a bit, and that added quite a few costs. The final cost was about $192,000 for some change in quantities and to shave those stringers and do a few other things that are we weren't anticipating. So the final cost is $192,000. There's still 3,000 foot of guardrail that needs to be upgraded to meet code, and we'll do that incrementally over the years with our staff. We'll do 200, 300, 400, 500 feet a year. It's essentially adding a board and moving another board. You can have no more than 4-inch spacing between the boards. So that's something we can do pretty easily, and we'll absorb into our operating budget. But the project's done, and it looks great. If you haven't been out there, I appreciate your feedback. If you go out and take a look at it. And that concludes my presentation tonight. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Carl. Any questions? Commissioner.
I have 2 questions, actually. And I thought your words in here about significant and prolonged review was a very sensitive, thoughtful way of describing Santa Barbara's permit review process. But so it looks like about $250 a linear foot, and I just wondered what kind of things the review process added to drive the cost up that high, or was it just the difficulty of getting it attached that drove it up?
Chair Sloan, Commissioner Sly, how the code applies to something like that is not 100% clear. There's tensioning issues, there's compression issues with the posts, and keeping that tension strong enough so that you can't fit a 4-inch sphere between the cables. That's the design criteria. So when they went through that and they came up with the requirements to tension the cables that much, you had to up the size of the cable and the fasteners. So times 600 feet, it gets pretty expensive. Another thing I mentioned in the staff report, the bidding climate is not real good for contracting entities right now. Bids are coming in quite high. So it was a combination of those two things. We had an engineer from Public Works do the design, and then it took quite a while. We spent months working with our building department and our engineers from Public Works to come up with a design that could be permitted, consistent with the code. One thing I'd like to mention that Scott and I have worked on quite a bit over the years is design immunity associated with engineered plans and meeting code requirements. It's really in the best interest of the city to go through that effort, get all the permits, make sure you have the proper design, and pay what it costs for something like this.
Thank you. The second question is, when you go to replace the rest of this rail that you referred to over time, are you subject to significant and prolonged review of that as well, or can you just replace what's there as it is?
Commissioner Sly, it's part of the same building permit. So what we're going to do is there's already 3 boards there. One's on the deck. We're going to move one up, add 1 or 2 boards, and it'll meet it's wood. It's a lot easier to deal with than the tensioning the cables and everything else. So fortunately, it's all part of one permit, and we'll just incrementally get sections signed off. So the cable rail's complicated for a lot of different reasons, but it looks really nice, and I think it was a good direction from ABR to send us down that path to try and preserve the views. And fortunately, it's 600 feet out of over 4,000 feet. It's not the entire wharf. So that wound up being in our financial best interest to limit it to just that section.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right.
Chair Spicer.
Wait, sorry. Commissioner Kramer.
I have a brief question, Carl. Has there been any effect on the fishing at the end of the pier? I haven't been out there to see it, but...
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Kramer, I don't think so. A couple fishermen kind of had some comments. They asked us to add some fishing pole holders, which we've done. And it's been very busy. There was some, we had to close the end of the wharf for a couple of days, and a couple of people were disappointed with that. But Cushman did the project in probably 2 weeks less than they had anticipated, so they moved very, very quickly. And now I haven't heard anything. I go out there on a regular basis, and my staff's out there, and I think it's the new normal. People are getting used to it.
All right, great, thank you.
Mr. Reedman, my apologies. Yes, sir.
Chair Spicer, I just wanted to add that this is something that we've sort of grappled with for years. And I always like to say that my predecessor, who was the director, John Bradley, for 15 years, nobody fell off the wharf while he was the director. As soon as I got promoted, I came back from a 5-day vacation, and somebody had rolled off the wharf in a wheelchair. And there were several other incidents, including the infamous car that drove off the wharf. And Carl and I thought, well, it's a guardrail. It's never going to stop a car from driving off the wharf. This thing is pretty sturdy. Those are like 6x6 vertical beams, and you would have to back up your car and really be intent on driving through this thing. It's really sturdy. So it's a question we've gotten a lot over the years. Why is there no guardrail, around the end of the wharf? And some people like it, some people don't. But I think we finally came to the point where it's the right thing to do. So we proceeded.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I appreciate that. Okay, with that, we'll move to harbor operations and Mr. Cronman.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Well, following up on what Scott reported on in his director's report on the Stearns Wharf Y and the new speed limit, I just wanted to add a couple of things. Number one, as this indicates, or sort of indicates, this is, of course, the project area or the speed limit zone. And I wanted to note that signage with municipal code citations are up on the pilings now, so there's no mistaking when you're in that area. They're quite visible, and the public really should be able to see them and obey that restriction. And in kind, I wanted to also thank the commission. It was actually the commission, after we discussed the accident last year, that encouraged us to pursue this, and particularly it was Chair Sloan at the time. And I want to thank the Commission for its support, for pushing us in this direction, which gathered unanimous support at the Council's Ordinance Committee and at the full Council. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. I think it's one of the classic ways we work together as staff and a commission on right-minded projects. So thank you for that. And also, it's been a couple of months since we met, and so it probably seems like distant memory, but we had one heck of a nautical swap meet in May. We had 62 vendors, and they had, believe me, because you can see in this picture, plenty to sell, and eager crowds snagged everything, excuse me, grabbed great deals at our 9th annual event. It's an interesting thing. This isn't like the Harbor Festival where the whole community shows up at once and it's a parking lot of humans. They filter throughout the entire period. It's really a nice flow of folks. It's never overcrowded. Everybody seems to appreciate it. The vendors either sell out or come close to selling out. We've often joked sometimes they sell a lot of their stuff to each other, which is not unusual in the nautical and water business, ocean business. But also I wanted to remind, this was a partnership between ourselves and the Harbor Merchants Association. This was a benefit for them. The spaces were only $10, so out of the $620 they made, they probably spent half of it at least on the donuts, coffee, bagels, fruit, and what have you. We want to thank them again for their partnership. It's worked very well for many years, and we expect to enjoy that partnership moving into the future. And some folks have asked me already when the next one is next year. This is one of those mark your calendar things, so if you want to get a vendor spot, don't call us to sign up. Just mark your calendar. We'll let you know way ahead of time when to sign up. But it'll be on May 11th, 2019, Saturday, May 11th of next year, if folks had interest in participating in this swap meet. It's really kind of become a standard. It's really gotten traction. Like I say, last year I think we had 63 or 64 vendors. This year we had 62, so it's not like it's losing interest. And as it was already alluded to when Scott talked about his meeting with Councilmember Gutierrez, we had a fantastic, even though it was midweek, we had a fantastic July 4th celebration. Again, the family-friendly aspect of it was emphasized throughout the event. There were bands and bounce houses and what have you on West Beach. Stearns Wharf had a big celebration going on all day. There were vendors on Cabrillo Boulevard who did very well as usual. And the fireworks display went off promptly at 9 p.m., courtesy of Garden State Fireworks, who I believe this is their 4th year doing this. And it was simulcast on KGEE 92.9 FM. Things went off pretty flawlessly. Very, very few, if any, law enforcement contacts. And so there's one department and one person I wanted to personally thank. I'd like to thank the police department for their presence during the day, just walking the beat, making friendly contacts, and creating a good sense of rapport and presence on the beach has made a huge difference in the last several years. And I also wanted to personally thank my colleague Dominique Samario, who spoke early. She is really she does the heavy lifting for the department on this event, and she's really the face of our fireworks show. As far as the waterfront department goes, she does all the social media outreach and the advertising. I work with her on press releases and this and that, but I have a relatively minor role. Harbor Patrol does a fantastic job keeping the area clear during the fireworks show. So between Dominique's work and her colleagues over at the Parks Department and our maintenance staff, who does a heck of a job building berms, putting up fences, cleaning up afterwards, it's really a team effort. My role is minimal, reporting to you, ordering the pizza for everybody the day of and what have you, and flying at 30,000 feet. So thanks to all of them and everybody else who participated. It was a great show. And with that, I would conclude my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cromman. Any questions? Well, I echo your kudos to the staff. That I was down there as well, and it was a great event. So thank you. Okay, we move on to requests from the public. Item number 8. Jeanette, you want to fill me in?
Sure. Item 8, new copper leach rate regulations for vessel bottom paints. Recommendation that Harbor Commission receive a report from the State Department of Pesticide Regulation on new leach rate regulations for vessel bottom paints in California harbors.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, as you well know, information about and compliance with regulations related to vessel bottom paints or anti-fouling paints, or AFPs as we call them, have been long-standing elements of the Waterfront's Clean Marina program. Recently, the State Department of Pesticide Regulation implemented new regulations governing the rate at which copper can leach into the ocean from anti-fouling paints. This is a major regulatory step being undertaken. And these regulations, which went into effect July 1st, will govern the types of bottom paints distributed by manufacturers and available to boatyards and recreational boaters. So it's across the board. There are some exemptions that you will hear about. And so instead of trying to explain it all, I was told there'd be no science kind of thing. Instead of trying to explain it all from the staff level here, we've invited Aniela Barant, who is an environmental scientist with the Department of Pesticide Regulation, to join us tonight. And Aniela is going to present an overview of the new regulations and answer questions from the Commission and the public. So at this point, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Ms. Barant.
Thank you and welcome.
All right, thank you for that introduction. So again, my name is Aniela Barant, and I'm here today from the Department of Pesticide Regulation to give an overview of copper anti-fouling paint regulations in California. Before I talk about copper anti-fouling paint regulations, I just wanted to give a brief overview of the California Department of Pesticide Regulation. We're comprised of 6 different branches, including a registration branch, which coordinates the registration of pesticides, including anti-fouling paints in California, Human Health Assessment Branch, Pest Management and Licensing, Worker Health and Safety, Enforcement Branch, and then finally, the branch that I'm in, Environmental Monitoring. I'm in the Environmental Monitoring Branch, specifically in the Surface Water Protection Program. Since marinas are surface waters in California, that's why I'm here. I also wanted to put up the DPR mission statement, which is to protect human health and the environment by regulating pesticide sales and use and by fostering reduced risk pest management. So we have these dual purposes, and I wanted everybody to keep those in mind as I go through this presentation. Protection of human health and the environment, and then pest management. So I'm going to go through a lot of information in the next 10-15 minutes, so I have an outline to guide us through it. I'm first going to give some background on copper anti-fouling paints in California. I'll then discuss the new copper anti-fouling paint regulation. I often will abbreviate copper to CU, so I just wanted to put that note there. I'll talk about compliant versus non-compliant paints, existing stock and enforcement, and then some mitigation recommendations from our department. So why is the Department of Pesticide Regulation even here to talk about copper anti-fouling paints? A lot of people don't really consider it a pesticide. Well, the copper in anti-fouling paints is considered a biocide, and therefore it's a pesticide, which is why we have regulatory authority over copper anti-fouling paints. In fact, DPR is the only authority in California to register or cancel the use of a pesticide, in this case, an AFP. So we were alerted to copper contamination in certain marinas in California from a DPR monitoring project that got started in 2006. For this monitoring project, we sampled 21 marinas across the state of California, from freshwater marinas, mostly in Northern California, brackish water marinas, which is mostly in San Francisco Bay, and saltwater marinas. We sampled in Northern and Southern and Central California. Some of the number of boats in some of these marinas range from about 400 marinas to 5,000, which is actually Marina Del Rey, which is the largest marina in the state in LA. And of course, we sampled for copper. So I'll briefly talk about our results. So we found that Southern and Central California saltwater marinas had the highest copper concentrations in the state. The copper concentrations in marinas really only matters in terms of water quality parameters. And we compare the concentrations to two water quality parameters, a short-term level, which represents an acute standard, where the endpoint is mortality for the non-target organisms, and then a long-term level or a chronic level, which is sublethal effects on non-target organisms. So what matters for us as a regulatory body is exceedances. So if we exceed one of these two levels. So we found out of the hundreds of samples that we took, 33% of the water samples were over the acute level and 51% were over the chronic level. So because of all of these exceedances, this triggered a series of regulatory actions. So I'm not going to talk about the different regulatory actions. We can talk about it later if you're curious. However, I'll just skip to the end, which is the new copper anti-fouling paint regulation. So the new copper anti-fouling paint regulation, which is found in the California Code of Regulations, Section 6190, which I attached in a packet for each of you, just says no copper-based anti-fouling paint or coating shall be registered over a certain leach rate. And any currently registered paint above that leach rate is subject to cancellation. And this applies to recreational boats only. And of course, this went into effect July 1st, 2018. So recreational vessels only, that applies to vessels for pleasure and or residences. This does not apply to vessels, military vessels, government vessels, or commercial vessels, which can include passenger ferries, excursion vessels, tugboats, workboats, fishing vessels, etc. On the regulation, there's a list of some of the commercial vessels that this regulation does not apply to. So with that, we'll move on to compliant versus non-compliant paints. DPR has categorized these paints into two different categories, Category 1 and Category 2. I mention that because there are a lot of stakeholders around the state who think of compliant versus non-compliant paints in terms of Category 1 and Category 2. So Category 1, compliant paints, actively registered paints under the leach rate cap. Therefore, Category 2, actively registered paints over the leach rate cap. There's over 90 currently registered copper-based paints that are in compliance. So how do we tell which paint belongs in which category? So the key to this, to understanding Category 1 versus Category 2, is actually the EPA registration number. So this is a number that is assigned by the United States EPA, not DPR. It's assigned by the United States EPA because these paints first have to be registered at a federal level before they can be registered by the state. So EPA, they approve the label before the products are registered in California. And EPA is the only governing body that can approve a label for pesticide use. So what we're recommending is we will have a list of Category 1 and Category 2 paints, and it's to cross-reference the EPA registration number with the category list. So as an example, this is Vivid Anti-Fouling Paint. If one looks on the can, you can find an EPA registration number, which is 60061-116. And you can find that on the list of, this is actually an example of a compliant paint, so a Category 1 paint. However, there's this -AA here. This is called an alpha code. So what are these alpha codes? They're used to distinguish between paints registered under the same US EPA registration number, and this alpha code is assigned by DPR. So this is typically done for different color paints or a product with a different name. So for example, here I have Super KL and different colors for this paint, red, blue, black, green. And so each of them have the same registration number and then different alpha codes. So many paints with the same color are in the same category, but not all of them. So we're just emphasizing that we should double check the alpha codes on the list. Another item that I wanted to emphasize is the label is the law. So this is true for all pesticides all over the state of California and all over actually the US. The label is the law. So for example, on this label, it says that this anti-fouling paint is for commercial or Navy shipyards only, and it's not for use on recreational vessels. So this is an example of the paint that may be over the leach rate, but it can be applied to commercial vessels and you'd still be in compliance with the law. We're also emphasizing it's important to follow directions on the label and the technical data sheet for that paint. The reason is because the leach rate is calculated using parameters from the label and the TDS. For example, if on the label it says to use 2 coats and 4 coats is applied, that's doubling the leach rate and not providing any kind of lowering of copper entering the marinas. So yes, this will help result in copper concentration reductions. So list of compliant paints. I was really hoping I'd come here today with a final list of compliant paints. However, many paint manufacturers, since we're only 18 days from when the regulation was instituted, many paint manufacturers are still changing their formulations and updating their labels. And the lists, they're changing every day. However, I attach my business card, so I can provide lists when we publish them on the website. I don't want to tell people that one paint is compliant when it really isn't, or vice versa. But we still expect over 90 paints, probably more, to still be available to use on recreational vessels. So I also wanted to talk about existing stock and enforcement because we get a lot of questions on these. So existing stock. So because of this new regulation, paint manufacturers can no longer sell non-compliant paints to dealers or retailers or import them into California. So once these lists are finalized, boatyards and retailers will no longer be able to buy from the paint manufacturers non-compliant paints. However, the non-compliant paints that they have in stock, they typically will have about 2 years to sell or use those paints. There may be some exceptions to this 2-year timeline. And a lot of this is really nitty-gritty details about how paints and pesticides are registered in the state of California, but it just depends on how they get canceled. Currently, there are no paints that I know of that will have an exception to this 2-year timeline. But if this happens, again, we'll be in touch about it. We're also emphasizing that as a practice of good stewardship, boaters should strongly consider a Category 1 paint with their next repainting. So enforcement, this is another question we get a lot. So I am not enforcement. I will not be doing any type of enforcement. However, I've been told that enforcement, they conduct marketplace inspections to check 2 main things. One, that pesticides sold in California are actually registered for use in California. There's no Nevada paints coming in, for example. And that labels match the version approved by DPR. And so they set their own enforcement schedule. The county agricultural commissioners also have the ability to do pesticide enforcement, but that just depends on each county's ag commissioner's priorities. So with that, finally, I'll talk about some mitigation recommendations. And so what is not included in the regulation and therefore is a mitigation recommendation is actually concerning hull painting. We have no regulation on the requirement of management on hull cleaning. However, it's important that hull cleaning be addressed because the leach rate cap relies on a particular best management practice or BMP cleaning method. And this is because hull cleaning can be a significant contribution of copper to water. However, we have no jurisdiction over BMP versus non-BMP cleaning. We just don't have the ability to regulate the discharge from the hull bottoms. So what we're really pushing and trying to work with different stakeholders on are local solutions for BMPs. I know that Santa Barbara has a training and certification program for their divers to use BMP cleaning methods. The Port of San Diego and LA Beaches and Harbor are implementing their own programs associated with BMPs, and they kind of have been doing a lot of work on this front, so I'll briefly talk about them. First, the Port of San Diego has, for a while now, required all hole cleaning businesses to obtain a permit and include a BMP plan template. However, what they're looking for when they enforce is mostly no plume is associated with cleaning. LA Beaches and Harbor actually just passed a hole cleaning ordinance last month. This includes a certification process for best management practice cleaning. They are also including language such as what they want the BMPs to be is just mostly related to pollution prevention, then also pollution control devices designed to maintain and improve water quality. They've stated that if the ordinance is violated 3 times in a 12-month period, that is a misdemeanor. And LA Beaches and Harbor, since it's our Marina Del Rey, it's run by the county. Therefore, the sheriff is the harbor master, so they have the ability to enforce this, I think, more than the Port of San Diego does. So here's also, since I've been saying BMP a lot and non-BMP, I just wanted to put pictures of what we consider BMP and non-BMP. So non-BMP, that's like a rough abrasive pad that a lot of people have in their kitchen to scour. And then the BMP, it's a soft pile carpet. So that's just one example of a BMP. So some other mitigation recommendations, just talked about BMP cleaning methods. Another recommendation is hole cleaning be done no more frequently than every 4 weeks. To increase boater awareness and acceptance of copper anti-fouling paint alternatives. To foster new incentive programs and continue to support existing programs to convert copper painted boat holes to those painted with alternatives. And then finally, and this is really more a mitigation recommendation for the water boards, but site-specific objectives for copper for certain marinas or harbors. So finally, we are asking for help from everybody across the state of California. We still have more work to do. We really are asking for help to help DPR keep Category 1 products or compliant products on the market. And the main way to do that is to mostly just follow the TDS and label instructions, including number of coats, wet and dry film thickness, and the lifetime of the paint. We also wanted to emphasize that we understand it takes time to see reductions in copper concentration in marinas and harbors, and boatyard capacity for turnover is limited. However, I know that this is like a major stakeholder effort, and I think that we can accomplish reductions in copper concentrations in marinas. So with that, I can take any questions. I've printed out this presentation, so because I know I presented a lot of information, so you can always call or email me if you have any questions at any time. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Sly, do you have a question?
Yes. Why are commercial and government vessels exempt?
So the way that marinas act is there's not a lot of inflow and outflow, and so it's kind of like a big bathtub. And the commercial vessels and the military and government vessels, they're often in and out and not staying for a long period of time in a harbor or in a marina. And so since the recreational vessels are there for longer periods of time, they leach out right into the marina, causing more of an issue related to them.
Okay. Commissioner McRae.
I have a question about the mean copper release rate regulation. It would seem intuitive that the initial copper leach rate would be very high when you first painted the boat and put it in the water, and then it would decrease over time.
Yes.
And typical anti-fouling repaint periods are on the order of a couple of years for even the most heavily used commercial boats.
Yes.
So it's fairly frequent. How is that amount calculated? Do you take the entire year's total daily leach rate and average them?
Yes.
Or is it that first day?
Yes. So we look at the leach rate over the lifetime of the paint. It's an average leach rate. So the method we use is called an ISO method, and it's just basically a mass balance calculation, which takes inputs such as the lifetime of the paint. And then we adjust it basically to something called the DOME method, which many scientists have figured out in peer-reviewed literature that is the most accurate way to measure copper release over the lifetime of the paint. And therefore, because we've looked through the literature and done a lot of modeling on this, we figured out that using that equation, adjusting it to the DOME, closest to the DOME rate, will be the leach rate, the average leach rate over the lifetime of the paint.
That sounds like a fair assessment.
I know it's a little complicated, but yeah.
And I have another question. I know how these things typically seem to go from in other areas, but how many actual enforcement people does the DPR have out in the field that would be doing surface water?
So it really depends. I can't actually answer that for the enforcement branch because it really depends on what they prioritize. Usually with a new regulation, I would expect them to be conducting more enforcement and on this particular subject. However, we have enforcement's broken up into 3 different branches or sections, and there's like a northern, a central, and a southern regional office. And so it really depends on what each of those offices prioritize. I can find out more if you're interested, though.
In particular, say a guy owned a place that sold bottom paint. How frequently could he expect to have somebody come by and check his stock and the date and when it actually arrived and what category paint it was and so forth?
So again, yeah, I'm not quite sure. Yeah. However, I can get back to you on that.
Okay.
I mean, I wouldn't expect it to be like every day or anything like that. Just because that would be but yeah, I can get back to you on that, and yeah.
Any other questions?
Other questions?
So why don't we just make sure that there's no non-compliant paint coming to California?
So that's part of what enforcement will be doing.
Okay.
And we've worked with the different paint manufacturers on this, so they're very well aware of all the changes. And so they'll no longer be able to sell the non-compliant paint to different dealers, boatyards, retailers.
That's great. I mean, now that we've moved to the 5th largest world economy, just California, you can make that statement and they have to listen.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for coming and providing that report. If there's any other questions.
Mr. Chair, if I might, I just want to add one thing. That Damon Hulse, the owner of Harbor Marine Works, our local boatyard, is very much aware of this topic. He wanted to be here tonight to hear the presentation, but he had other business he needed to attend to. But obviously, right, where isn't, not too many do-it-yourselfers in Santa Barbara Harbor. They haul out one place or another, and many of them at Harbor Marine Works. So he's very much aware of this, following it, and will be on top of all the regulations and probably communicating with Ms. Barant as we go forward.
Thank you. And Ms. Barant, thank you for coming and presenting that.
All right. You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Okay. We move to item 9. Jeanette, will you please fill us in?
Yes, item 9, appeal of slip permit termination for slip 3A045, Mr. Michael Best. Recommendation that Harbor Commission consider Mr. Michael Best's appeal of slip permit termination for berth 3A045 in Santa Barbara Harbor and take action to either A, uphold the slip permit termination, or B, uphold Mr. Best's appeal.
Okay. Who's leading this? Mr. Bossy, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. As you just heard, we're here to hear slip termination appeal for slip 3A45. I just want to let everybody know that I like to preface this by stating that a slip permit termination for unpaid fees is an action that the department only rarely undertakes. We have a very gracious timeline for payment. It's not something we like. This is not something we like to do. We're very proactive through this entire process, calling possibly visiting the vessel if we know exactly who it is and see them around. So we really go out of our way to make sure this doesn't happen. The last termination for unpaid slip fees took place in January of 2017. Slip 3A45 is a 25-foot slip, and I would first like to go over with the Commission the Department's billing process and then discuss the events that have led to us being here this evening. So as I said, we have a pretty gracious slip billing process. Slip fees are due on the 1st of the month. You have 2 weeks to pay them, and on the 15th, they are considered late. Right about the 15th, if we haven't received your payment, we will send you what we call our first late slip fee notice, or a 15-day notice, asking them, hey, we haven't seen your payment. Is it possible that you missed it? You know, it's 15 days due, you now owe a late fee. We send out a second notice at 30 days, so at the end of that month, and that basically initiates the termination process in the sense that it provides a date 30 days out from that says if you don't pay by X, the first of X month, your slip will be terminated. Around the 45-day mark, we also send a third notice stating that you have 15 days, your termination is imminent, and all through this, the entire amount owed has to be paid. So partial payments are great, but they don't get you out of it. Then finally, at that 60-day timeline, we issue a notice of termination, effectively terminating the slip permit. And then from there, the slip permittee does have an option to request a waiver from the waterfront director, and from there, the waterfront director can deny or approve. If it's denied, it comes before the Harbor Commission. You are the final say in our slip fee permanent termination process, so it does not move on from here. So as far as the timeline events for slip 3A45, on April 1st, our slip fees were due. No payment was received. On April 15th, the first late slip fee notice went out. On May 1st, the second late slip fee notice went out, and that also notes your payment must be received, in this particular case, by June 1st, 5 p.m., or your slip will be terminated. On May 16th, we did receive a $300 partial payment from Mr. Best. Again, you have to pay the entire amount in order to get out of this process. On May 18th, a third late slip fee notice was issued. On June 5th, the termination letter was mailed to Mr. Best, and from that point, he has 10 days to appeal to the waterfront director. On June 14th, we received Mr. Best's request for a waiver from the waterfront director. On July 5th, our waterfront director denied the waiver from Mr. Best. And on July 11th, Mr. Best submitted his official request appealing the slip permit termination to the Harbor Commission. And all these items are in your agenda packet and staff report this evening. So that brings us to this evening, July 19th. Again, this is the final stop for this particular process. A little bit on payment history. Mr. Best transferred into the slip 3A45 on March 1st of 2013. He was a live aboard for about 5.5 months from that period. Over the past 24 months, Mr. Best has received 9 late slip fee notices, and including 6 of the 9 were received prior to the Thomas fire and the subsequent Montecito debris flow. I should also note that Mr. Best has received in the past 3 other termination notices, including this particular one, so the 2 prior he did pay up on. In conclusion, in addition to preparation and distribution of the letters I mentioned, the various 15, 30, 45-day, and 60-day notices, staff routinely calls the slip permittees, and we called Mr. Best. He was aware of the situation, obviously, and we do this, again, in an effort to avoid late fees. This is not something we like to do, but unfortunately, these efforts have been unsuccessful. And it is staff's recommendation that the Harbor Commission deny Mr. Best's appeal and uphold the termination of slip permit 3A45. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I know Mr. Best is here and would like to talk to the commission as well.
Thank you, Mr. Bossy. Mr. Best, if you'd like to step up, I also see that we have a public comment for this. So, Mr. Best, why don't you go first?
Hello, my name is Michael Best. Thank you for letting me address you regarding my slip permit termination. I was born and raised in Santa Barbara. I've been playing or sailing in the marina since I was a child. My mom has had a couple of boats down there in the marina. My uncle was a commodore of the yacht club for a couple of years. And I recently have been having issues with work. I was doing landscapes for a couple of jobs in Montecito. Once the Thomas Fire did take place, I had 2 large jobs cease, and monies were no longer available for me, and I had to pay my employees and continue to try to pay everything else. I have a P.O. box. A lot of my mail goes to a P.O. box. I don't directly receive it immediately. I am presently employed now with 2 jobs, and I basically am trying to prevent losing my slip. I am aware that I have received notices, and I have tried to stay on top of that. I have these jobs that I had were what I was relying on, and without them, I had to come up with other ways to pay my bills, which was selling things that I had, which kind of set me up for financial disaster down the road. Along with all this Thomas Fire and everything going on, my 84-year-old mother became very ill and had to go to UC Irvine. So a lot of my days were a variety of driving back and forth to UC Irvine to be with my mom and coming home in the evening to do work during the day before I had to go back. And lots of times I wasn't able to even go to my P.O. box. Once I did find out that this process was happening, I tried to curtail it from getting to the point to where it is. Excuse me. I'm really having a hard time keeping everything together. I have a lot of hardships going on in my life right now. I know that doesn't really matter in a lot of ways, but I am trying to change things, and I would like to have my slip permit not be revoked. As I said, I've been in the harbor since I was a child, and I have a lot of friends down there. I have people that think highly of me, and I am a low-key person. I don't have many issues except for these slip fees. I've paid them in the past with no issues, happily. I understand that I'm not avoiding that I'm responsible for them. I just basically need to keep my slip, and I'm asking that I have some compassion and maybe some understanding based on what's been going on with the Thomas Fire and my mom and life, basically. I have many things I wanted to read, but I don't seem to be capable at this moment.
Certainly, sir. Catch your breath. I understand that since the Thomas Fire, I think could be difficult, but there seems to have been a history prior to that. I don't want to be callous, but what makes me think anything would change?
Well, I was relying on paying it by in the office method, but I'm happily to do the auto removal of my bank account, so I don't have to go in person anymore. So that won't be an issue anymore. It'll come right out of my bank account. Like I said, I'm employed. I have 2 jobs right now, and if I lose my slip, I will be forced to move into a vehicle and become a homeless person, and I do not want that to happen.
All right. We're here to talk about the slip. I recognize that.
Yeah. Okay. I basically have been I've made my payment hoping that it would have an impact on my ability to keep my slip. I was hoping to be a show of good faith.
And how much is your monthly slip payment?
It's roughly $240, I believe. And I've been a liveaboard person, and I am presently living on my boat now because of my mother's situation. And
And let me ask you, sir, you've heard Mr. Bossy describe, and I would agree with him, that the department works very hard to keep all of our slip permittees from getting to this space. Would you agree that he has reached out to you?
I would agree on part of it. I'm not denying that there was a process that might have been applied to me, but I don't recall receiving phone calls telling me that your slip fee is late, you need to.
Okay.
And I'm not denying, there might have been a couple of times where I might have received that, but that could have been in the past.
Certainly.
Presently, with everything that's been going on, I don't really recall that, but then maybe I'm just not really paying attention because of all.
It could be like your mail that you weren't able to receive because it takes a while to get to the P.O. box, or something could happen.
But it would seem as if I would receive a message on my phone, and I might see that. So possibly.
Okay.
I truly, though, I feel I'm not an undesirable person in a harbor, and I really would like to have my slip so that I have a sanctuary, as I like to call it. I've been in this particular boat, since 2013, and I don't feel that I have a lot of problems at all there. And yes, I have some late fees.
Sure.
A lot of them, 5 of them in this past year. But as I've said, the Thomas Fire and the mudslide and all that just really just took me for a ride. And,
Certainly.
Presently, trying to get it, I do have it all together now. And I just would like to be able to have my slip. And I'm asking, just please, can I not lose my slip? It's all I have. It's my investment that I have. If I lose my slip, when you own a slip, you feel that you have interest. You have something, a possession that you can sell someday.
I understand.
And to have it taken out from me, I can't.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to stop. I understand. I think we'll discuss this, but I also wanted to see if Mr. Longerberger wanted to speak on your behalf as well.
Thank you for your time.
Sure, certainly. This is generally a 2-minute slot, but I'll give you some leeway.
All right, thanks. My name's Gary Longerberger, Mr. Chair, Harbor Commissioners, Mr. Reedman, Mr. Crumman, Waterfront Department. We've all been there. We're just that short from being out on the street. And, a lot of times it's family and friends pull you out. Well, we've got family here. Every harbor commissioner, you're part of the harbor family. And as such, you can see this petition. You can see the situation. So I'm asking you, as part of the harbor family, show some compassion. Show some empathy. Give him a chance. He's got the money. He can make the payments. He can make the cost. Don't add one more person to the homeless population of Santa Barbara. Thank you.
Okay. We need to discuss if we have any other questions, and then we need to render our decision. Please.
I have a question for Mr. Reedman. What are the grounds for waivers, and when you grant waivers, and why didn't you grant one in this case?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Kramer, I usually just look at the payment history, and if it begins to show a pattern, which this one was showing an increasing pattern of late payments, then I generally do not grant the waiver. We try and be very consistent on these things, particularly with payment, and not grant a waiver to one person and not the next person, and be very consistent. It wasn't that way in the old days around Santa Barbara Harbor. And so we spent a lot of years straightening that out. That's why you see this endless correspondence that goes out. We have the nice letter that goes out after 15 days that said, gee, has there been a mistake? Please check your records and give us a call. And then we have the second letter, which is the start of the 30-day clock and so forth. So we've gone through a lot of effort to try and not have these things happen. And when they do, it's very rare to grant a waiver.
Well, I know of you and the waterfront to be compassionate people, and that's why I asked the question about the waivers. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, I'd ask the commission to think this through, and then I'm going to ask for some recommendation. But vote your heart. But I also believe that as Mr. Riedman said, we have a process, and there's a reason. And I've been on the commission now 10 years plus, and we've only had this is only 3 or 4 of the slip terminations that we've had to deal with. So I think the process, it does work. I guess at this point we need a recommendation.
I think I'd make a recommendation to uphold the slip permit termination.
Okay, is there a second for that? I will second that. So we have a first and a second. I'm going to call for a vote unless there's any other questions. Okay. All in favor of option A, upholding the slip permit termination, please say aye. Aye. Any nays? Any abstentions?
I abstain.
Very good. Okay, I believe we are done with this topic. Commissioner.
Could I bring up one other thing? It seems that there are a lot of fees that have accrued, at an expensive daily rate and so forth after this termination date is effective. And I know there's a great need to be consistent and should be consistent. What happens with those fees as the termination is upheld? You're still trying to collect those fees, and how is it done? And
Commissioner Sly, typically in a slip permit termination of any sort, whether it's based on poor behavior in the harbor or in this case non-payment, the first source of repaying outstanding funds is from the individual's security deposit. And if there turns out to be money left over from that, it would be returned to the person whose slip permit was terminated. If there are no monies that exceed that amount and monies are still owed, they are still owed to the harbor. A couple of related notes on that. So if monies are still owed to the harbor, they will remain owed to the harbor, and certain privileges in terms of tying up at the harbor and using harbor resources will be extremely limited, basically none, until that gets paid up. In addition, what typically happens in a slip permit termination is, graciously again, the waterfront department will allow 7 to 10 days of the individual before they have to literally get their boat out of the slip in which they are no longer the registered slip permittee. And during that time, however, visitor fees are charged, and if there are still monies owed, it adds to those monies owed, and eventually it can add up to a lot of money. We encourage people to try and pay the money, and if they can't pay the money, and I believe this individual said he did have the money to pay, if they can't, once the slip is terminated, if they can't pay the money, we encourage them as best we can in a respectful and professional manner to find mooring other places in another harbor, because the fees start to pile up. We have a structured visitor slip fee that gets worse the longer you stay, gets more expensive the longer you stay. And what can ultimately happen in the end is if the debt gets so large the individual can't pay it, then we end up going to a lien sale process. And that's something we don't wish on anybody, and nothing we would like to have happen. So in the best of all cases, Mr. Best would pay up what he owes, and if he wants to be a visitor in Santa Barbara Harbor and pay visitor fees, that's certainly fine. Or if he wanted to relocate to another facility, another harbor, that would be fine as well. I hope that explains it.
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, very good. Thank you. We move to commission staff communication. Mr. Reedman, anything?
Mr. Chair Spicer, I guess I would just add, a couple of months ago, we did have a slip termination for entirely different reasons that you might remember with Mr. Paul Gillette. And just on this subject, he did take his boat out of the harbor and is gone and has relocated. So I just thought I'd let the commission know that that item has been taken off the table completely.
Okay.
Other than that, middle of summer, really busy.
Okay. Anything from the commission? Okay. At this point, I'm going to call for an adjournment. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anybody want to stay? Okay. Thank you.